Hello and welcome to Atlanta News First Sports Tonight. And our guest tonight is the newest voice of the Atlanta Braves, Brandon Gaudin. Brandon, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. It's got to be an exciting time for you.
It's beyond exciting. It's one of those days that the longer it goes on, you still can't believe that it's real, because this is a job that I grew up dreaming about, and this is a city that I love. And now to have the opportunity to take over for the Carey legacy and call the Braves games on television, it's really a dream come true.
Yeah, you will replace Chip Carey, of course, but you're no stranger to area sports fans because, of course, you did Georgia Tech. You do some other stuff as well locally, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, I moved down here in 2013 to take the job as a voice of the Yellow Jackets, was there 3 seasons, and since then I've transitioned over to network TV, but I've always kept my place here in Atlanta. I'm in Buckhead right now. That's where I live because I love this city, and I never envisioned this Braves job opening up, but when it did, I had my phone just buzzing right and left because everybody from my childhood and my family knows that that is always a job that I just held as kind of the pie in the sky. And fortunate enough that the Braves brought me in and sat down with them and just had a wonderful meeting, and a real comfort level I felt on both sides. And when I got that call that they were offering me the position, there's only a few moments probably in your life career-wise where you get a call that you'll always remember, but that is one of those calls that I will never, ever forget, and it was truly special.
How do you grow up a Braves fan? Because now, didn't you go to school in Southern Indiana?
Yeah, I'm from Evansville, Indiana. So I had an aunt and uncle who've always lived down here. And in 1991, when the Braves went from worst to first and into the World Series,
yes,
my family came down for Game 5 against the Minnesota Twins. Braves won 14-5, and I can remember walking into Fulton County Stadium that night like it was yesterday. I remember Mark Lemke hitting a triple down the right field line to bust it open in the 7th, and I remember holding my foam tomahawk outside of my uncle's car that night on the drive home. And from that night forward, I was hooked on baseball, and I was hooked on broadcasting, and I was hooked on the Braves. And so through the 90s, I watched the Braves every night on the Superstation. That was my connection to sports and to broadcasting. So I listened to Skip Carey, Don Sutton, Joe Simpson, and Pete Van Wieren, and then I would play make-believe games in my living room, trying to be the Braves announcers on TBS. And so when I say that this is kind of the childhood dream coming to reality, that's really what's taking place here.
It's really hard to put into words the impact that the Superstation has, because I can tell you, traveling with the Braves, covering them, because obviously I'm much older than you, traveling with the Braves and covering them during the 90s, everywhere you went, there were Braves fans because of the Superstation.
Yeah, and that's what really happened for me and my family. We all became Braves fans. Yes, we had the family ties here, and that was important. But what connected us to the team was TBS, because you could get every game. I would come home from school, and it was before Wrigley Field had lights. So you could watch the Cubs on WGN, right, yeah, with Harry Carey. And then at night, you got the Braves on TBS with Skip Carey. Well, in Indiana, everybody's either a Cards or a Cubs fan. I didn't want to deal with that. I went all in on the Braves at a young age, and we would come back, my family and I, for not only the 91 series, but we were lucky to be here for 92 and 95 when the Braves finally won it. And so those memories, when you're growing up as a kid at the age that I was, 7, 8, 9, 10, that left an impression on me, an indelible mark that has stuck with me forever. And today it just it comes full circle in a way, and it's really been a joyous moment and one that I'll never forget.
You talk about perfect timing. You were there when Sid slid, You had Sid slid and you had the World Series championship, so it doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah, the Sid Bream slide, I've said this many times, is still the sports memory that sticks with me the most from my childhood. I knew that if the Braves won that Game 7, that my dad and mom were going to take us back down to the World Series in 92. I sat in my couch in Evansville, Indiana, watching that 9th inning, clutching my tomahawk as tight as I could. And when Francisco Cabrera hit that ball into left center and Bream came around and slid and they said safe, my parents will tell you this story. I sprinted through my house waving that tomahawk around, jumping up and down. And so, again, those vivid memories of those Braves days from the past, and now to see the success that the team is currently having, it just makes it all the more sweeter.
That's the thing. They had that run of success. Then there was a little bit of a lull, obviously kind of a retooling and a rebuilding. and the job that Brian Snitker and Alex Anthopoulos have done to restock and rebuild it, because the farm system really has always been the kind of the backbone of the Braves, and it's rebuilt now, and it seems to be rolling in the right direction again.
Yeah, I mean, not too many people are focusing on the farm system when you got all these great players under long contracts.
Right.
It really is impressive what they've been able to do. And I will say this, when I went in for the interview process, of course, I sat with the folks at Bally Sports because they're the TV rights holder, but I also was able to sit down for an hour with Derek Schiller and Alex Anthopoulos. And, you know, you leave from that meeting and you think, how many sports franchises would have their GM and president sit down with the candidates for the TV announcing job? And the answer, honestly, is not many. And that, to me, said a lot about not only those two, but just kind of the organization and how well run it is. And I came away from those meetings just incredibly impressed with them and their vision, not only what they've been able to do with the team, but what they hope to do with the team as these years progress. And again, it just says a lot about them and their character.
You know, we talked about when you were a young Braves fan, but I want you to tell us a story about, you know, you writing a letter to Skip Carey, and he actually writes you back.
Yeah, so I wrote a letter to Skip Carey when I was 13. After 6 years of being a Braves fan, my mom said, why don't you write Skip a letter? And so I got out my pencil and my paper, and I remember penning that letter just like it was yesterday, and I put it in the mail. And I posted that on Twitter, the letter, because I still keep it as kind of a memory of a reason of why I got into this business. And I used to check the mail every day. And I'll always remember about 6 or 7 weeks later, a reply came in the mail, and it had Turner Broadcasting letterhead. And I said that this has to be it. This has to be from Skip. And I brought it in and read it in the living room of my house. And I've always kept the letter that I sent him, because he put it back in the envelope, and the letter that he responded with. That's Skip Carey and the Braves. That's the reason that I got into this business, and that's the reason that I fell in love with Braves baseball. And so that is a memento that I will always carry with me.
I mean, that is outstanding. That's something, like you said, you know, probably should be in a frame in your house if it's not already. All right, let's talk about this Braves team and what they have. It's solid, and it starts with what we've known the Braves all the way through the 90s, and that's starting pitching. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, look, I look at this rotation, and you don't want to sit here and say that it's Smoltz and Glavine and Maddox and back in the day when they had Millwood and Avery too, but it has the makings of just being incredibly special. And so hopefully, you know, I know the 5th spot in the rotation is kind of the one now that they're waiting to see how that comes into form. But you look at not only what they have in the starting pitching, but you just look in the field. And I know there's a little bit of a question right now at short and left, but there's so much stability. And now the catching spot is even stronger, I feel like, than it was a year ago.
No doubt.
And look, there's so much expected of this team. With high expectations, there's a lot of responsibility and weight to that. But they won the World Championship 2 years ago, so I think that this is obviously a team that can handle it, and it's just going to be an incredibly fun and exciting season.
Well, I think the thing that Braves fans could understand is like the 90s were built on pitching. I mean, this team has pitching and offense. I mean, they can score, and I think that's why they were able to win the World Series when they did, because they had offense and they had, you know, they were able to score a lot.
Yeah, if you go back to those 90 teams, you're right. Like you hear this all the time, but to win in the postseason, you've got to have more than just one good starting pitcher, right? Okay, well, the Braves clearly have that. They had that in the 90s, and that's why they were able to have success, even though some people say, well, they only won one World Series. But to get there as much as they did and to get to the World Series as often as they did through the 90s, you had to have incredible pitching, and they did. They do now. They also have the bats. And they've got an influx of this young talent that is locked up for a long time. And it's just, I think about how excited I was to be a Braves fan in the 90s and what really fueled that. And now I think about it 3 decades later here, and it's that same kind of excitement that has been building, obviously, with 5 straight NL East titles and hopefully many more to come.
Well, you think about the Braves, you think about, you know, they lose a Freddie Freeman, but Matt Olson, a hometown guy, I mean, from Gwinnett County, Parkview High School, he comes in. And, you know, his teams in high school won a lot. I know that means nothing, but he comes in right away with a great attitude, a great guy in the clubhouse, and is a very good player, by the way. So, I mean, you know, you replace those pieces with really good pieces, and now it's like you said, it's going to be interesting to see who's at shortstop.
Yeah, and I think, look, the early returns are that Grissom is going to be pretty good. Now, he's young, right? And he's not proven at that spot in the major leagues. So we'll see how that plays out through spring training. That'll be something to keep an eye on. Left field, as I said, is another spot that people are going to be watching. But I think you talk about the leadership. There was obviously when Freddie left, there was concerns about that, and a lot of people say that Dansby was the one who stepped in and filled that void. Well, now we know that Dansby's gone, and look, Dansby, it seemed clear that he was a great asset to the Braves and the community on and off the field. I don't think there's anybody from the front office, everybody in the clubhouse wouldn't debate that.
Right.
But it seems like there's a host of other guys that are ready to step up and fill that role, if not one person, a collective unit. And so I don't think there's going to be any shortage of leaders, certainly any shortage of talent coming into this season.
And I think the catching spot is something, Travis d'Arnaud has been a great catcher and done a good job, but then you pick up a guy like a Murphy, that really adds to it as well. So, that's, being solid and having depth too at positions like the catching spot is big.
I think what you get here, and d'Arnaud said this, when you bring in a second catcher, a second player at your position, some guys might get defensive. But he said, no, I welcome this. This is a long season. And to be able to split those roles, not only that, to have some rest days, because we know it's just so hard on those catchers, especially in the dog days of summer and August, to be down there in the heat for 9 innings day in and day out. But you're bringing in a Gold Glove catcher who also is pretty good with a bat. So you've got that 1-2 catching combination is going to be as good as there is in the major leagues. And I really think it helps fortify the Braves both defensively, and then it helps offensively as well.
Now, I got to ask you this. You talked about the catcher getting a little bit of rest. Are you ready for the grind of this major league season?
My first job out of college, I knew I wanted to get into baseball. And so I went out and started in minor league baseball in Orem, Utah, rookie ball, 76 games in 80 days, making $500 a month. And I told myself, if at the end of that stretch, you still have a passion for this industry and a passion for wanting to do this job, that's a pretty good sign. And at the end of the $500 a month and eating clubhouse peanut butter and jelly and the 13-hour bus trips in the Intermountain West, I was still hungry for more. And so, here I am 16 years later, and I didn't know that it would play out like this. And ultimately, I would get to take on my dream job. But it makes all those games and all those days and that lower pay feel worth it when you can kind of fulfill a dream that you've always had since you were a little kid.
We're both from Indiana, but from opposite ends of the state. You're from Evansville. I'm from the tippy top there outside of South Bend. And so, your first play-by-play job was what, with the Purple Aces, right, with the University of Evansville? So talk about that one. That's pretty cool as well, because that's a lot of people don't understand. That's a major basketball program with a nice arena that's relatively new. It's not brand new, but it's not old by any means.
Yeah, well, what I told my family today, and they know this, is that today is kind of the finish off of the trifecta of incredible opportunities that I've had. And there have been others, but I think about I got to go home to my hometown to the University of Evansville to broadcast games for the Evansville Purple Aces when I was 24 years old. 3 years after having that job, I got a call from my alma mater, the Butler Bulldogs, and they were coming off the run to the Final Four in 2010. Their play-by-play spot was opening up, and they asked me to come and be a part of their program. So I went from my hometown team to my alma mater, and now I get the chance to be the voice of the Braves on television, and that's the job that I grew up dreaming about and the team that I grew up following. So truly, like the 3 jobs that I would have put at the top of my list as a kid, I've now been able to sit in all of those chairs, and I get goosebumps thinking about it, and it's just incredibly special. And I keep using the word fortunate, but I just want to convey that I realize that my journey has been special and unique, and I just feel incredibly fortunate to have had these opportunities.
Your Bulldogs, back-to-back runner-up spots that I know you didn't broadcast the first one, but that one, I thought that ball was going in and it just bounces out and they lose to Duke. But the second one to make the run all the way to the final game was special as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, Butler's first Final Four run, I was not the voice. I was the voice of the Evansville Aces at the time, but I was there as a fan. I was sitting about 20 rows behind where Gordon Hayward put up that shot at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. It's probably a good thing that shot didn't go in, because if it did, there's no amount of security that was keeping me off that floor. And I may have ended up in a ditch later that night. But it did not go in. And then lo and behold, 3 months later, they had a vacancy in their play-by-play spot, and I was able to get that role. And the next season, Butler goes back to the Final Four. So that certainly is one of the biggest thrills in my broadcasting career. And those 3 years at Butler kind of helped get me to where I am today.
You know, I mean, that's an incredible story. Maybe you can help us tell this story, because you got Brad Stevens, a guy who was in the, I don't want to say real world, but he was in the corporate world, right? As a, was he in financial markets or something? And he comes out of that to coach. I mean, help us with that story. He comes out of there from the professional life to come back and coach basketball. I mean, that was incredible what he did too.
Yeah, Brad Stevens was in pharmaceutical sales at Eli Lilly in Indianapolis. Now, he played at a small Division III college in Indiana, but he was not a star. He was not going to go on to the NBA. But he just realized he didn't want to do the pharmaceutical sales. He loved basketball. He wanted to be a coach. So he walked in to the office of Thad Matta, who was the coach at Butler at the time. Ironically, Thad Matta is now back as the Butler head coach, sidebar. And he said, I'll do it for free. And they hired him as just an assistant, not making any money, just a volunteer. And then he worked his way up to being a paid assistant. And then he got the head job when he was 30 years of age. And I remember at the time I was a student. I was like, who's this guy? Who's Brad Stevens? Why are we hiring him? Well, it turned out that would be a pretty good move. And then, of course, he would go on, after taking Butler to 2 national championships, to go on and have all the success that he had in Boston. And I still see him quite a bit. I see him, I do a lot of Big Ten and Big East basketball, and he's in a lot of those venues with his role overseeing the Boston Celtics. And I'm thankful to be able to call him a close friend. And he's incredibly supportive. And one of the first messages I got today when the Braves job was announced was from him, just congratulating me, and that sure meant an awful lot.
Yeah, that is an incredible story, what he's done, and also yourself. Let's talk a little bit about, though, how conferences have expanded so far. I mean, I'm a Big Ten guy. I'm an IU guy. I never thought the Big Ten would go into the New York City market, which it has. You know, the SEC spreading out the way it's spread out. I mean, just the conference expansions all the way around. It's just incredible. The Pac-12 now including Utah, you know, I mean, just talk about all the conference expansions, if you will.
Well, the conference expansions, and now you've got all the NIL and paying players. And regardless of what your opinion is on all of that, change is here, and change is the new norm. And so UCLA and USC going to the Big Ten, and all the shifts that we've seen, there's going to be more to come. That's just the reality of the situation. We can call them student athletes, and yes, they are going to class. We get that, and they are hoping to get a degree. But this is a big business. It's a billion-dollar business, and there's a lot of money on the line. And so that's how this is going to continue to play out. Now, my hope is that they can figure out some ground rules for all of it, because there seem to be a lot of coaches at the collegiate level right now. They feel like they're being worn a little thin, because every time a player comes to them that is unhappy, they're like, well, shoot, if this player isn't smiling, he might be getting a call from another school and he could be out of here tomorrow. And so I think they feel like it's this constant drain of having to not only recruit new players, but recruit the players that are currently on your team. And that's not just for basketball, that's for football, that's for the women's sport. There's a lot of this going on right now in college athletics. I just hope that we can get a governing body that can figure out some really good ground rules, because right now it is a little bit of the wild, wild west.
Well, I think they could start, just my opinion, Brandon, I think they could start by making sure the coaches stay and just don't jump anytime they want. Because if I see my coach jump, then why can't I?
Yeah, that's the other thing, is a lot of people say, well, hold on, why are you getting mad for kids jumping if a coach leaves because his next new contract comes into play? And certainly, I understand that. I think both sides are just looking for the best personal opportunity. We are seeing now, though, that kids are having the opportunity to make some decent money. I don't know the exact figures, but just covering the Big Ten, there's some guys in there that are making some really good salaries. I call them salaries because they, in a sense, are. Yeah. They're making a lot of money, life-changing money. Now, they're the exception. You know, this third guy off the bench isn't getting anywhere near that. But at least we're getting to a point where not every dollar is just going to the head coach and the assistants. Some of the money is going to the players. So again, is it a perfect solution right now? No. Is it hopefully a step in the right direction where we can find a middle ground that there's a solution that works for everybody? I sure hope so, because college athletics needs to figure it out.
Now, you're still very young, at least to me, you're young, but I want to ask you this. You're on the Madden video game, right? You're the voice of the Madden video game now. So do kids that get to know that you do that? I mean, have you been stopped at all, or just do people talk to you about being the voice of the Madden game?
It's hard to believe I've done that since 2017 now, so it's been a while.
Wow.
And Charles Davis, who's the CBS analyst on the #2 crew with Iron Eagle, he's my partner on that video game. And I've spent more time with Charles over the last 7 years of my life than anybody else because of all the recording sessions that we've had. It's been a really cool thing. It's one that I never expected to come along. It just came out of the clear blue sky back in 2016. But, our faces are not in the game. It's just our voices and names. So, and I actually like that because you don't get recognized. Nobody knows who you are, but you still get to be a part of the franchise. The one thing that is interesting is when people who know me from the video game hear me call a game in real life, I always get the same response. It's like, you sound a little different in real life. The video game kind of sounds robotic and repetitive. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's just me recording lines in a studio. Right. It's a video game. So it sometimes can be like nails on a chalkboard listening to the video game because it does sound so much different than what you sound like when you sit down and broadcast a game that you're visually seeing in front of you.
Okay, when do you head down to spring training and when do the TV games, because the TV games are going to start pretty soon. I mean, they're down there now reporting. So we got about, another 2-3 weeks before they start? 2 weeks maybe, something like that?
So our first broadcast is March 23rd, and we broadcast for the spring training games leading up to opening day on the 30th. But the first call I received was last night from Jeff Francoeur, even before the news was announced. And I picked up, I didn't know who it was. It was a 678 number, and I pick up, and he didn't even introduce himself. He just goes, "You better get used to this voice. We're going to be spending a lot of time together."
He's a great guy.
Oh, man. And I knew right away who it was because I've watched him and I watched him play and I've heard his voice so much through the broadcast. But I talked to him for 10 minutes. I felt like I had known him for 10 years. So I'm just excited to get with him and the rest of the crew, on air, off air, everybody, and get this thing rolling here in a few weeks.
Well, Brandon, thank you so much for joining us and taking this time out. I really appreciate it. Brandon Gaudin, the new TV voice of the Atlanta Braves. Thanks again, Brandon. Appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Jeff, can you still hear me?